The sky was still painted in shades of pre-dawn when 11-year-old Amira stirred from her thin mat. Her tiny fingers fumbled for the wooden tray near her bedding, where a neat pile of small golden mangoes sat, freshly washed the night before. She picked each one gently, inspecting them for blemishes, before placing them into a bowl. Another day. Another try at the market. Maybe today she'd sell enough for a loaf of bread. Maybe not. Muted voices filtered in from the next room. Her mother and great-aunt were whispering, again. "I told you, Auntie Halima, there's nothing left." Her mother's voice cracked. "What about the change from the last batch?" Halima replied quietly. "I used it for Malik's medicine. He's still burning up. He hadn't eaten anything since yesterday." A long pause followed, then a deep sigh, a kind that spoke of helplessness more than frustration. Amira drew her knees to her chest. She knew they were talking about her younger brother, Malik. He'd been coughing for days, burning up with fever, his tiny chest heaving with each breath. They had taken him to the rundown clinic nearby, but the nurse had simply shrugged. "No money, no help," she said. Amira blinked hard, swallowing back the tightness in her throat. Her mother had already sold everything worth anything, her wedding necklace, an old charcoal iron, even Amira's school bag. Still, it hadn't been enough. Outside, the village lay still in a strange silence. Once it had been filled with laughter, children dashing around barefoot, women braiding hair and trading stories, boys chasing lizards with sticks. But not anymore. Two girls had disappeared in the last few months. The first was 9-year-old Lena. She had vanished on her way back from fetching water. The second, a girl named Zara, was last seen playing under the almond tree near their compound. Gone. No word. No clue. No one found. Amira rose quietly, slipping into her threadbare slippers. Her only dress hung loosely on her small frame, the seams stretched from growing limbs. But it was all she had. She stepped into the chill morning air, the dust swirling around her toes. The market was nearly an hour's walk away, across roads blanketed in red earth. Balancing the mango bowl on her head, she began her journey, thinking of Malik, of the nurse's cold words, of the heavy silence in their house. By the time she reached the bustling edge of the market, she found her usual spot, beneath the wide shade of a flame tree. She arranged her fruits and whispered, "Fresh mangoes, sweet and ripe." Few people stopped. She had sold just 3 when she noticed him. A tall man stood a short distance away, watching. His skin was dark, hair completely silver, his expression unreadable. He wore an elegant caftan and spotless leather sandals. He looked out of place. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just stared. Amira looked down, uneasy. Moments later, he walked over and crouched beside her. "How much?" he asked, pointing to the fruit. 10 coins, she replied quietly, eyes fixed on the ground. He picked one, studied it in the sunlight. "Do you live nearby?" "Yes," she murmured. "What's your name?" "Amira." He studied her face for a long moment, then stood. He bought 5 mangoes and left without another word, but something lingered in his gaze, something cold that sent a shiver down her back. By late afternoon, Amira had returned to the market, but this time not to sell. Her bowl nearly empty, she clutched a handful of small coins she had quietly taken from Great-Aunt Halima's old tin box when no one was looking. She approached a familiar figure, a middle-aged woman seated near a crate of dried herbs and bark. Her name was Madame Elsie, known for her sharp tongue but also her occasional kindness. Amira held out the coins with trembling hands. "Please, I need something for fever," she whispered. Madame Elsie looked at the girl, then at the coins. "This won't buy much, my dear," she said with a sigh. "My brother," Amira said, lowering her voice. "He's very sick. Please." Elsie hesitated, then tore off a small portion of herbs, wrapping them in old newspaper. "Boil it. Let him sip it little by little. But if his eyes roll back again, take him to the clinic." "Thank you," Amira murmured. She turned to leave, but something made her glance across the road. Near a stall that sold yams and palm kernels stood a man, still and refined in his posture. His outfit was crisp, his skin dark, his beard neatly trimmed with silver strands. His name, though Amira didn't know it yet, was Mr. Daniel Oken. He wasn't buying anything, just watching. Amira froze as their eyes locked. Then she bolted down the alley between stalls. She didn't see him follow. But Mr. Oken walked calmly to Madame Elsie's table. "That girl," he said softly. "What's her name?" Elsie looked up. "Amira. She's a sweet one. Her brother's ill." Daniel gave a thoughtful nod. "Does she come here every day?" "Most days, yes." He nodded again, then turned and walked away, without buying a thing. That evening, just before the sun disappeared behind the hills, Amira sat outside their hut, peeling the last of her mangoes. Malik lay on a mat beside her, his breathing shallow, his lips cracked. Their mother Rafia had done everything she could: cold baths, oil massages, whispered prayers. Nothing worked. They waited and waited for the fever to break. Then came the sound, soft, low, unfamiliar. Not the rumble of a kike or the roar of a motorbike. This was a smooth hum, the kind of sound only expensive cars made. And they all stepped outside. A black sedan stood parked just outside their compound, its tires spotless, the paint shiny. It didn't belong in this part of the village. Then the back door opened, and out stepped Mr. Daniel Okan. He wore a flowing blue native caftan, perfectly pressed. His shoes gleamed. In his hand was a brown envelope. Without hesitation, he walked up to them. "Good evening," he said smoothly. Rafia narrowed her eyes. "Good evening." "I've come to speak with your daughter," Daniel said. Amira instinctively stepped behind her mother, her chest tight. Daniel continued. "Her name is Amira, yes? I saw her at the market this morning. She reminded me of someone." "Why are you here?" Rafia asked, voice guarded. He held out the envelope with both hands. "I'd like to make an offer. A bride price." From inside the house, Auntie Halima stepped out, broom in hand. "What did you say?" "I want to marry your daughter," Daniel said evenly. "No," Rafia replied firmly. "She's a child. And you're a grown man." "I understand," he nodded. "But your son is dying. I can help." Tears brimmed in Rafia's eyes. "You don't even know us." "I don't have to," Daniel said. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't need explanation." The envelope remained in his outstretched hand. "With this," he continued, "Malik gets treatment tonight. Your family eats, you pay rent, school, clothes, everything." Rafia looked at it, bulging, thick. She turned away. "This is not our way. Take your money and go." Daniel said nothing. He bowed his head once and left quietly. But the envelope he left behind. That night, their small home was soaked in shadows, the oil lamp on the wall casting flickers across cracked mud walls. The room was quiet, too quiet, except for the faint, shallow rhythm of Malik's breathing. He lay under a threadbare wrapper, his tiny body still too hot, too weak. Amira sat silently on a stool, peeling the last mango slowly. Her hands moved, but her mind wandered. Rafia had been on the floor for nearly an hour, her eyes fixed on the brown envelope Mr. Okon left behind. Finally, she spoke. "Amira," she said gently. Amira didn't look up. "That man, he made us an offer," Rafia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He wants to marry you." Amira's hands froze. Rafia went on, her voice trembling. "He said he'll pay for everything. Malik can go to the best hospital. We won't worry about food or rent anymore." Amira slowly turned toward her. "No," she said, her voice hard and steady. "Mama, he's older than Grandpa was before he died. I'm not a woman to be sold." Tears welled in Rafia's eyes. "I know, my child. I know." "But why me?" Amira cried, her voice cracking. "I'm just 11. Why do I have to suffer?" Rafia dropped her head in her hands and sobbed. "I have nothing left, Amira. Nothing. But before Amira could speak again, a strange, choking sound filled the room. They both turned. Malik was seizing, his back arched, his hands flailing, his eyes rolling back. "Malik!" Rafia screamed. Amira dropped the mango and rushed over. The boy's body twisted violently, his jaw clenched in pain. "Help me!" Rafia shouted. They lifted him between them and ran barefoot through the dusty night to the village clinic. The lights were still on, a nurse behind the counter flipping through papers. "Please!" Rafia cried. "My son is dying!" The nurse looked up slowly, then at Malik's limp body. "Where's the deposit?" she asked flatly. "We don't have it now," Rafia pleaded. "But we will. Please, just help him." "No deposit, no treatment." "But he's a child!" Amira shouted through tears. The nurse turned away. Rafia stood still, the weight of Malik in her arms. Then without another word, she turned around and walked home. Broken. Back in their room, Amira sat in stunned silence, her arms still shaking. Malik lay wrapped in the faded cloth, his breathing faint but steady. Then Amira spoke. "I'll do it," she whispered. Rafia looked up. "What?" "I'll marry him," Amira said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "If it means Malik gets help, then I'll do it." Rafia couldn't speak. She just wept harder. The sun was barely up when Mr. Daniel O'Connor returned. Amira stood by the doorway, shoulders stiff, lips pressed tight. Daniel looked at her with a strange softness. "He'll be taken to a private hospital today," he said calmly. "The best care. Arrangements have already been made." Amira didn't speak. She simply nodded. But deep inside, her chest felt tight, like a stone sat where her heart used to be. There was something unsettling in the way Mr. Oaken looked at her, the way he smiled without showing his teeth, the way he moved, smooth, controlled, never hurried. He hadn't said anything inappropriate. He hadn't touched her. And yet, something didn't feel right. As dawn pushed through the trees, their compound began to stir. Not with joy, not with song, but with hushed movement. No music played. No ululations filled the air. Just the rustle of wrappers, the quiet footsteps on red earth, and murmured prayers. A few neighbors gathered, some out of curiosity, others in pity. They kept their distance, whispering behind their hands. Inside, Amira stood as Auntie Halima gently fastened coral beads around her neck. "They are small," she whispered, "but they'll carry your name." Amira's dress didn't belong to her. It had once been worn by another girl from down the road. A girl who was married off and never returned. No one mentioned her anymore. Amira's feet were bare, her face blank, her hands cold. Rafia stood nearby, silent, fingers knotted together, her eyes refusing to meet her daughter's. Malik wasn't there. He had already been taken earlier that morning. A man in a black suit had come in the same sleek car and quietly carried him away. Now Amira was alone. Outside, whispers floated in the air. "Is it true? She's marrying that old man?" "I heard she didn't even agree. It was her mother." "She's only 11. "It's the same thing that happened to Miriam. She didn't make it." When Mr. Daniel O'Connor arrived, he wore a charcoal gray agbada. His face was unreadable, his shoes still spotless. He walked slowly as if the dust couldn't touch him. No greetings, no blessings. He walked straight to the center of the compound and stood waiting. A local elder cleared his throat and opened a tattered prayer book. The ceremony was short, barely audible. No music, no laughter. Just whispered scripture and the rustling of dry leaves. When asked if he took Amira as his wife, Daniel said, yes. When it was Amira's turn, no one waited for her to respond. No one even asked again. She stood silently, eyes on the ground, lips unmoving. There were no rings, no dancing, no gifts. Just silence and stares. When it was over, Daniel turned and walked back toward his car. Amira followed. People stepped aside wordlessly. Some stared openly. Others looked away. She didn't even look back. He didn't smile. Not once. Something isn't right. I can feel it. Mr. Okan opened the car door. Amira climbed in without a word. The drive was long, winding through unfamiliar parts of the countryside. Amira sat quietly in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes watching every passing tree and fading clay house. The road narrowed as they climbed a gentle hill. Then she saw it, a mansion. Grand, isolated, silent. It stood like a sleeping lion on top of the hill. Tall gates, high walls, glass windows that caught the sky. Everything looked too clean, too untouched. The car rolled to a stop. Daniel stepped out first and walked to the front door, unlocking it with a slow, practiced motion. Amira followed. Inside, the air was cool, sterile. The floors gleamed. The curtains hung perfectly straight. No laughter, no voices, no dust. Daniel led her to a small room. A bed, a chair, a table, folded clothes. "This is your room," he said simply. Then he walked away and closed the door behind him with a soft click. Amira stood in the center, surrounded by stillness. The silence was different here. Not the silence of peace, but of something else, something deeper. The room was cream-colored, its tiled floor flawless. The bed, too big for her small frame, was dressed in crisp white linen. A single wooden chair sat by the window. A folded nightgown rested on the bed. She didn't sit, she didn't cry, she didn't even breathe for a moment. She just stood there. The gown she wore, the one borrowed from a girl no one spoke of anymore, clung to her like someone else's skin. Her hands felt numb. And then came the thoughts. Whispers she had heard at the market, warnings from older girls, market women. "He'll take what he wants. They always do. You're his wife now. Just close your eyes and bear it." Amira slowly sat at the edge of the bed, hugging her knees. She stared at the wall, motionless. Her body ached for rest, but her mind would not obey. Then creak, the door opened. Mr. Okan stood there holding a tray. He walked it slowly and placed it on the table. A steaming bowl of soup, a spoon, and a cloth napkin, folded neatly. "You should eat," he said softly. It was the first time he spoke directly to her. Then, without waiting, he turned, walked to the adjoining door, and stepped into the next room. The door closed. Click. The sound of a key turning. Amira sat frozen. He hadn't touched her, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't demanded anything. Just soup. She stared at it, steam still rising. Her hands gripped the blanket beneath her. This wasn't what she feared, but it also wasn't comfort. The soup grew cold. The fan above her head turned slowly, casting shifting shadows across the ceiling. Her body still would not rest. The silence of the house was too loud, thicker than fear. She lay down, then sat up, then stood by the window. Minutes crawled. Eventually, curiosity won. She crept to the door. It wasn't locked anymore. Amira opened the door slowly. The hallway beyond was wide and dimly lit, lined with soft golden lights that hummed low on the walls. Her bare feet touched cold tiles, but she didn't make a sound as she moved forward. The house was perfect, too perfect. Curtains uncreased, furniture untouched. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and something else she couldn't name. She passed a wide bookshelf and a tall grandfather clock, ticking quietly. Further down, a hallway branched off. At the end of it, a soft glow spilled from a door that hadn't been fully closed. She stepped closer. Inside was a room wrapped in thick carpet, with warm lamplight pooling around shelves filled with books. And in the center sat Mr. Daniel Okan in a plain robe, resting quietly in a large leather armchair. He wasn't reading. He was just sitting, his hands folded in his lap, eyes unfocused. Still. Amira paused by the door, unsure if she should enter. Then, without looking at her, he spoke. "Can't sleep?" His voice was soft, like it always was. She hesitated, then nodded and stepped inside. He turned to her this time, his eyes gentler than they had been before. "Come," he said. He reached over to a small table beside him and picked up a slim notebook. Handing it to her, he said, "You should write, even if it's just your thoughts." Amira stared at it, confused. "Why?" "Because stories help things make sense," he said, almost in a whisper. "And I think you'll need that." His face was calm, but something behind his eyes looked tired, like he'd seen too many things, lived too many lives. Amira turned slowly, and her eyes caught sight of another hallway, dimly lit, leading to a heavy wooden door at the far end. The brass handles shimmered oddly in the light. "What's in that room?" she asked. Daniel didn't move. His voice came low, deliberate. "Some doors aren't ready to be opened yet." She looked from the door to him. He nodded once, slowly. "Everything will be clear in time, but tonight, rest." Amira didn't press further. She turned and walked back down the hallway, clutching the notebook to her chest. Back in her room, she sat cross-legged on the bed and stared at the cover of the notebook. Blank, waiting. Then for the first time since entering the mansion, she lowered her head onto the pillow and closed her eyes. And this time, she slept. Amira woke to the soft clinking of porcelain. Her eyes fluttered open. Mr. Daniel O'Con stood by her door with a small wooden tray. On it, a warm cup of tea, a cloth-wrapped cookie, and a tiny glass of orange juice. He entered the room without a word and placed the tray gently on the table by her bed. Then he looked at her and said, almost kindly, "Good morning." Amira blinked at him. "You don't have to come out yet," he added. "Just rest. You're safe here." Then he turned and walked out. The door closed quietly behind him. She stared at the tea. Steam curled softly into the air. It smelled sweet, nothing like the bitter leaf her great-aunt used to boil for fevers. The cookie looked soft, wrapped carefully like a gift. Her fingers brushed against it, half expecting it to vanish. And that's how the next few days went. Each morning, Mr. Ocon brought her breakfast: warm bread, fruit in neat slices, honey-glazed biscuits, or tea laced with ginger. He never asked for anything, never stayed long, never sat too close. He didn't touch her, didn't shout, didn't even raise an eyebrow. He simply knocked, placed the tray down, and left. Strangely, it made things harder. Amira had prepared herself for fear, for pain, for commands, but not for this quiet politeness. He treated her like glass. Not the kind you hide away, but the kind displayed under light, carefully, like something rare. She didn't know what to do with that. At night, she wrote in the notebook he had given her. Sometimes she drew. Sometimes she only scribbled her name, over and over. One night she wrote, "Why is he being kind?" She didn't know the answer. Then one morning, he knocked twice, gently, as always. "Would you like to visit your family today?" he asked. Her heart jumped. "Really?" He nodded. "Yes. I've already sent word. They'll be home." The black car was already waiting outside. The ride was quiet. Amira sat in the back seat alone, her fingers pressed against the window glass. When they arrived at her old home, she saw Rafia standing in the yard, tying a wrapper tighter around her waist. Auntie Halima sat by the fire, sorting charcoal. And there, seated under the shade, was Malik, alive, awake, eating from a small bowl of porridge. His eyes were brighter, his hands steadier. He saw her. He smiled. Amira's chest bloomed with warmth, sudden and soft. She didn't mean to, but she smiled back. The afternoon air was still and quiet. Inside the mansion, the old clock ticked softly on the wall. Amira sat on the edge of her bed, notebook in her lap, but her pencil didn't move. She had drawn the same flower 3 times already. She was now 3 days into her stay in Mr. Ocon's house, and her visit to see Malik had brought a wave of comfort she hadn't expected. Malik was smiling. He was better. And now, she didn't know what to feel. Mr. Oaken had left earlier that morning. He hadn't said where he was going, only, "There's food in the kitchen. I'll be back before evening. Don't worry." She watched the black car disappear through the window. Now the house felt even quieter than usual. Out of boredom, Amira wandered the hallways. She traced her fingers along the smooth walls, past the library, peeked into the kitchen again, glanced toward the sunroom with the glass door that opened into a small garden. Then she noticed it. The door at the end of the hall. The one that was always locked. But today, the handle moved. It was unlocked. Her heart pounded as she looked over her shoulder. The house remained silent. Slowly, she pushed the door open. The room was dim but warm. A soft lamp lit the space with a golden glow. And all around her were photographs, hundreds of them. Boys, girls, children from all over. Different countries, different skin tones, some smiling brightly. Others looking serious, wary, or exhausted. Each photo had a name and a date. Some of the dates had been crossed out with a red X. Some were untouched. Amira stepped closer. There was a girl with braids holding a teddy bear standing beside a clay hut. A boy with crutches beside a riverbank. A group of children in school uniforms holding books with pride. In the corner was a wooden chest. She opened it. Inside were notebooks, letters, envelopes, stacked with care. She pulled out one and unfolded it. "Dear Mr. Daniel, I passed my exams. I'm going to senior school. Thank you for believing in me." Another. "I sleep safely now. I eat every day. I don't cry at night anymore." Another. "The violin you gave me still works. I named it after you." In letter after letter, words of thanks, words filled with hope. All addressed to Daniel Oaken. Amira clutched them to her chest. And then, she felt it. A presence. She turned sharply. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I suppose it's time you knew the truth," he said softly. Amira stood frozen, the letters trembling in her hands. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Mr. Daniel Oaken walked slowly into the room. He wasn't angry. He didn't shout. He simply looked weary, as if the weight of every story in that room had been sitting on his shoulders for years. He closed the door behind him gently. "I imagine you have questions," he said. Amira's eyes scanned the room again. The photos, the letters, the names. Her voice came out cracked and dry. Are these girls you married?" Daniel shook his head, firmly. "No," he said. "None of them." He looked her in the eyes now. "These were girls I found. Girls who were forgotten, discarded. Girls who were being sold, or already taken. I didn't marry them. You're the first." Amira furrowed her brows. "Then why me?" Daniel walked over to a chair and sat slowly like his bones were full of memory. He let out a deep sigh. "Because you were about to be married off anyway," he said. "You just didn't know it." Amira felt her stomach twist. Daniel went on, his voice steady but low. "I had heard rumors in your village about a man, a dangerous man, one from a group that moves from place to place, buying, stealing, pretending it's tradition. Girls disappear. Some are kidnapped. Others are sold with a blessing. It's quiet. It's hidden. But it's real." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I saw him watching you at the market, the day before I came to your home. That was enough. I had to act before he did." "You're lying," Amira whispered. "I wish I were," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But I've seen it too many times. I had two choices. Let that man take you, or get there first." She turned to the wall of photographs, dozens of children, stories behind every one. She began to understand. These weren't trophies. They were memorials. Daniel rose and walked to the wall. He touched one photo gently, his fingers pressed against the glass. "For the last 20 years, he said, "I've gone from village to village, country to country, looking for girls like you, The ones no one notices. The ones with no voice. He glanced at the photos with red X's. Not all of them made it. Amira dropped the letters. Her fingers loosened. Daniel picked up one of the old notebooks and read a line softly. Dear Mr. Daniel, I never thought I'd read. Now I do. He closed it. Sometimes I paid for school. Sometimes I dug wells. Sometimes I just sat and listened. I tried to adopt some of them, but the system doesn't make that easy. So I helped how I could, quietly. Why not build something? Amira asked. A school? A real organization? You're rich, right? He gave a tired, almost bitter smile. I was, but I gave most of it away. And money has limits. It doesn't protect girls like you from systems that don't care. But marriage, as twisted as it sounds, gave me legal ground. It gave me time. And I'm old, Amira. I don't have forever. His eyes softened. I didn't save you because I had to. I saved you because no one else would. And for the first time since stepping into his house, Amira didn't see him as a man full of secrets. She saw him as a man full of sorrow and stories. The days that followed moved slowly, wrapped in a silence that no longer felt strange. Amira and Mr. Daniel Okan didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. A quiet understanding settled between them. He still brought her tea each morning, still placed biscuits in folded cloth, still knocked softly and left without waiting for thanks. But now when he looked at her, there was something different behind his eyes. Peace. Amira spent her hours reading from the books lining the study shelves. Sometimes she wrote in the notebook he'd given her. Sometimes she simply sat by the window and watched the light move across the room. Daniel spent most of his time in the garden, or seated quietly in his leather chair, staring into space like he was listening to something only he could hear. Then came the seventh morning. There was no knock, no tea, no warm words, just silence. Amira waited and waited. Finally, she stepped into the hallway, barefoot and chilled. The tiles were cold under her feet. She checked the garden. Empty. The library. Still. Then she walked toward the one door she had never been allowed to enter before. His bedroom. She knocked once. Twice. No answer. Her hands shook as she turned the knob. The door creaked open. There, lying on his side in his robe, was Daniel, his silver hair fanned against the pillow, his chest still, his face calm. Too still, too calm. He was gone. Amira didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, her heartbeat louder than the wind outside. He had known. He had known his time was near. That's why he had moved so quickly. That's why he'd chosen her. Not to claim her, but to save her. She stepped toward the bed and sat beside him, her hands trembling. She opened the drawer beside him. Inside was a sealed envelope with her name written across the front. She opened it. Amira, if you're reading this, I'm no longer here. But that's okay. I've lived my life. Now it's time for you to live yours. Inside the study, you'll find everything, land titles, savings, property. It's all in your name now. But what I'm truly leaving you is freedom. Don't waste it. Daniel. She pressed the letter against her chest. And for the first time, Amira wept. Not from fear, not from confusion, but from love. The news of Mr. Daniel Okan's death spread first in whispers, among the mansion staff to a quiet lawyer in the city. Then, like a ripple in a still pond, it rolled down the hill and into the village. People gathered at the gates. Some brought flowers. Some folded their arms in silent prayer. Some stared. But no one expected what came next. 4 days later, a city lawyer named Madame Adesua arrived, holding a sealed brown folder and wearing a somber look. She didn't waste words. The documents were legal, stamped, final. She opened the folder and read aloud. The estate, accounts, properties, everything belonging to Mr. Daniel Okan shall be inherited by Miss Amira Musa, age 11, legal and sole beneficiary. The villagers gasped. Even the elders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Madame Adesua explained that Daniel had only purchased the mansion a few months ago, already knowing his time was running short. He had planned everything in secret. Every last thing was now Amira's. Some villagers muttered blessings, others curses. Under the mango tree, Rafia fainted. The next morning, the elders gathered privately, speaking in hushed tones behind closed doors. Children pointed at Amira as she walked by. She owns the mansion now? Just last week she was selling mangoes. He married her just to trick the system. Witchcraft, it has to be. But Amira didn't speak. She didn't explain. She didn't run. She simply listened, just like Daniel used to. Back at the mansion, she sat quietly in his leather chair, staring out the same window he had. She touched the books he had touched, ate soup like the kind he used to bring her, and walked the same silent hallways. But now, with different steps. Then, on the third day after the will was read, Madame Adesua returned with another set of papers. Transition documents. There's enough here to cover your education, through university and beyond, she said softly, but we'll need to assign a legal guardian to manage the estate until you're of age. Amira looked up from the document. Do I have to leave? She asked. Adesua blinked, surprised. No, this is your home now. Daniel made that very clear. You can stay for as long as you want. Amira leaned back, letting the weight of that truth settle on her chest. She had her own keys, her own bed, her own books, and now her own decisions. And the first one she made stunned everyone. She reopened Daniel's old financial ledgers and gave clear instructions. Funds were to be withdrawn. Not for herself, for the village. The villagers didn't know what to say when they saw the clinic, once crumbling and neglected, undergoing a full transformation. Workers repaired the roof. New beds were brought in. Medicines arrived in cartons. A new nurse was hired. No more would children be turned away because they couldn't pay. Because Amira Musa had given the order. She used a portion of Mr. Oken's funds to rebuild the local clinic, ensuring that every child, no matter their background, could be treated. Then she built a small school, right where she once sat, dusty and barefoot, selling mangoes. Chairs, books, uniforms. She paid the salary of the first teacher herself. But Amira wasn't done. She gave one more instruction quietly but firmly. From now on, no girl under the age of 18 is to be married off in secret. Every union must be registered. Every girl must be accounted for. She created a new registry, monitored and protected from the estate she now owned. People reacted. Some called her cursed. Others, dangerous. But then, they began to call her something else. The girl who came back with fire. On a cloudy afternoon, Amira walked alone to the village cemetery. The wind tugged gently at her skirt. In her hands was a small photo frame, Mr. Daniel's favorite. It showed a mirror leaning under a cherry blossom tree in bloom. She placed it carefully beside his fresh grave. Then knelt. You weren't my husband, she whispered. You weren't even my father. She touched the cold earth. But you were my light. The trees rustled gently. And for a moment she thought she heard the wind answer. Live. Weeks passed, then months. And the mansion on the hill, once quiet, still and strange, began to transform. It became a refuge, a sanctuary, a home. The mansion was no longer just Amira's. It became a safe haven, a place where girls could sleep without fear, where they could eat, learn, and begin again. One of the first to arrive was Jemima, 9 years old, rescued from a forced marriage to a man 4 times her age. She came with nothing but a torn dress and eyes full of silent questions. Another girl, Binta, only 11, had fled from an uncle who had kept her hidden in a dark storeroom for months. She arrived barefoot, shaking, her voice barely above the breeze. Amira opened the gates to both, not as a queen, not as a savior, but as one of them. She gave them rooms, clothes, warm food, but most of all, she gave them something they hadn't known in a long time. safety. Some nights Amira walked the hallways by candlelight, notebook in hand. She would pause outside doors, listening for nightmares. When she heard whimpers, she would whisper softly through the door, "You're not alone." One rainy evening, while dusting Daniel's old bookshelf, Amira reached for a thick red-spined novel. As she pulled it from the shelf, an envelope slipped out. No name on the front, just one sentence. "If they come for you, don't be afraid." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a list, names, dates, places, dozens of them. Some were government officials, others were powerful men and tied to child marriages, trafficking, and underground buying of girls masked as tradition and charity. These were men protected by silence. Daniel had been watching them. And now, Amira had their names. At the bottom of the list, written in Daniel's neat hand, was one final message. "Use your voice, Amira. Burn the dark. They can't kill light when it knows who it is." Amira read those lines over and over again. That night, she sat cross-legged in the library, surrounded by photos of rescued girls, her journal open beside her, the envelope clutched in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared at the flame in front of her. And then, she made her second decision. She would not only build homes, she would build a movement. 1 year later, the world knew her name, Amira Musa. No longer the child bride from a forgotten village, but a global voice for girls like her, girls the world once overlooked. Her story began to circulate after a journalist from Lagos climbed the hill to her home chasing a rumor. A young girl had inherited a wealthy man's estate. But what the journalist found was not just a headline. They found a revolution. Amira had grown, not just in height but in presence. Her voice was still soft, but now when she spoke, ministers listened. When she wrote, people reposted. When she walked into courtrooms, traffickers trembled. With Daniel's list in hand and Madame Adesua by her side, she launched a daring initiative that shook governments and institutions across the continent. They called it the Musa Report, named not only in memory of Daniel, but in honor of the fire he left behind. The report was detailed. It was terrifying. It was undeniable. It exposed rings of trafficking disguised as tradition. It named names, powerful ones. It shone light in the darkest corners of politics and power. And the backlash came fast. Threats, lies, hacking attempts. But it was too late. Because Daniel hadn't just left her a house. He had left her evidence. He had left her a strategy. And most importantly, he had left her an army. Survivors, teachers, quiet donors, brave mothers, and girls who now had something they never had before. A future. By the time Amira turned 14, she had spoken at the United Nations. By 15, she helped change child marriage laws in 3 African countries, making underage unions a crime under international law. And at 16, she returned, alone, to the very spot her story began. No camera crews, no bodyguards. Just her. She stood before the school she had built. Girls played in the yard. They wore uniforms, not scars. They held books, not burdens. They giggled, not wept. She watched them and smiled. "I used to be afraid of silence," she said to a small group. "But now I know." A shy little girl raised her hand. "Are you a queen now?" she asked. Amira laughed softly. "No," she said. "Queens wear crowns." She gently tapped her forehead with 2 fingers. "I carry fire." Night settled softly over the mansion on the hill. The village below was quiet, its lights flickering like stars trapped between trees. Amira sat in the grand old library, once his, now hers. Shelves lined with books she had read, walls now filled with hand-drawn portraits and letters from girls around the world who called this place home. A candle burned on the table beside her. She opened her journal, placed a pen to the page and wrote, "I hope you see me now." A breeze slipped through the open window. And for a fleeting moment, she could have sworn she heard his voice. "I always did." But this time, Amira didn't cry. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the world that once tried to bury her in silence. Now it whispered her name in reverence. No longer was she just the girl who inherited a mansion. She was the girl who rebuilt it into a refuge. She was the girl who carried the names of the forgotten and turned them into legacies. She was the girl who stood in the face of power and said, "No more." And girls came, from towns and villages, from cities and corners. Some with nothing, some with stories too heavy for words. But they came, and Amira welcomed them, not as a leader or legend, but as someone who had once sat exactly where they stood. She gave them a bed. She gave them books. But most of all, she gave them fire, a fire that would never be extinguished. Because now the world knew, you can silence a girl for a moment, but not forever. Not when she knows who she is, not when she's walked through darkness and learned how to light it up. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.